Lesson 7. What is CSS? Principles of Styling. So I have my website pulled up with the corresponding page to this lesson. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's a style sheet language that's used to control the presentation of HTML. There's other style sheet languages as well. For example, there's XSL, which helps control the presentation of XML files. So this is basic, but for most people, CSS will be the primary or only style sheet language that they'll use. Now, there's a couple of different methods of using CSS. The first method, which is the one that you're already using, is the one where you include within each of the corresponding tags, you include style equals and then put the CSS in there. So that's kind of the method that we've been using. It's the easiest and quickest method to use, but if you're writing a lot of code, it's not the cleanest because all of your tags are saturated with these styles, and the whole principle behind CSS is to separate the presentation or the style from the actual content itself. So the next method is placing the CSS in the head of your document. So in this code sample that I've written, and I'm after going through these different methods and going through some of the other items here, I'm going to basically create these pages and show you that, hey, these different methods are exactly the same. So the second method is by using this style tag. Note that in inline CSS, we're using a style attribute within, for example, maybe your P tag or your H1 tag. Over here, the style has a tag of its own, and then followed by this attribute type equals text / CSS, basically to tell the web browser what kind of information, what type of information this is. Although most modern web browsers, you don't have to do this. This is just to be semantically correct, but you don't have to have it. You can just have style and then wrap in between the less than and greater than signs. And then what you would do is you would have all of your CSS within in between these style tags, and the way you will reference the CSS to your actual HTML is either through using the actual tag itself. So for example, here's the P tag. So if I put a P, I wrap it around this rule set right here, then anything that I put in between these braces will be applied to all of the P tags. But if I want to be very specific, I don't want to reference by tag. I want to then apply either an ID. This is an ID is represented by a £, or by using a class, which is represented by a dot in front of it within the CSS portion. Now I know this may be a little bit confusing at this point, but just bear with me. It's going to make a lot more sense towards the end of this lesson. Within your actual HTML, the way you reference the ID is by ID equals, and then here's intro. Again, within your CSS, you need to put a £sign in front, or a number sign or hashtag sign, depending on what you want to call it. But you need to put this sign in front of the word intro, and that denotes a reference to an ID. You can and then you can also reference it using a class. So I have class equals important, and it's denoted in the CSS with a dot in front of it. The difference between the use cases, which is covered over here, is an ID is something that occurs one time. So in here, I only have one intro paragraph. For example, your logo might, if you want to manipulate using CSS, you might want to use an ID because you have one logo. but I'm gonna have a multiple important paragraphs, so that's why it's a class. And also, if I want to have one that says maybe a highlight class, that would make sense. So I can just throw a bunch of use them multiple times to highlight multiple things within the web page. The next method is probably the cleanest method, but if you're starting out, it might just be kind of a pain in the behind as you're just designing the initial website, because you have to toggle back and forth between two files, your HTML file and then your CSS file. So basically the principle of this is you want to take everything within the style tag, dump it into a separate file. And so in this case, I saved that as lesson 7 dash external css.css. So all of your CSS is now in an external CSS file. And then you want to then save the HTML file as you've always been as an .html file. But what you want to do is within the head portion of your web page, you want to use the link rel equals style sheet type equals text /css, and then href equals, and this is where you create the you reference to where your CSS file is located, and that's basically how you would link your CSS to your HTML document. And that's the principle of having an external CSS file. You save a separate CSS file and you reference to that CSS file within your HTML document. So this method and the second method is pretty much the same thing. It's just whether you want to have all this in your head or if you want to have it in a separate file. And as I've covered a few minutes ago, classes are ones that you will have multiple instances of. IDs are ones that you have one instance of. And generally, you don't want to really reference to just the tags unless you want all p tags to, let's say, maybe have a certain font or something along the lines of that, or if you want all images, the img tag to have maybe a border or something. That would probably be the only maybe scenarios where it would make sense to reference just the tag name as opposed to giving it an ID or a class to reference to be a little more specific. And here are some useful CSS properties in addition to the ones about formatting text and fonts, which we already covered. And if you haven't checked it out, go to the lesson 6, which is the immediate previous lesson, and that's gonna give you some of the CSS properties for manipulating and transforming your fonts. But the background color, background image, background repeat, these are pretty useful because that helps not just manipulate the background of your web page, but also if you have, let's say, certain sections and you want to have a custom, let's say, background for your header, that this would be the way to go. Margin is and padding are ones I use all the time, and the reason is because, for example, even on this page, see how everything is nicely spaced out, so that all of that is done using margins and padding. The difference between margin and padding is margin is the space around the object, padding is the space in between or inside the object. And I'll show you once we go into the examples of what these mean. And also there's some shorthand approaches to achieving the same thing to help you save a little bit of time as you're writing your code. So now we get into the fun stuff. We're going to take this, and I'm going to just create a new file, save this as lesson 07 dash example.html. And so if I open this file, this is basically how it looks like. It's very straightforward. The whole the main purpose of this is just to give you an idea of how to use IDs and classes, and how to make these CSS references. So I'm going to add maybe a few more things to here. So if I add like a H1, H1 lesson 7 example. Note here, because the classes can be recycled, if I just copy this class important and dump it into the H1, if I refresh it, notice that it's red. And that's a really cool thing about using classes. It's you can really save a lot of time by recycling code over and over again. Another maybe if I want to add a no margins class here in the CSS, margin equals 0. If you can actually apply multiple classes CSS references to one tag. So if I want to remove the margins, I can just type no margins. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to remove the CSS comments, because I don't have it set where it provides comments for CSS. So I think that actually makes it more confusing. And I'm going to add a line so you can kind of visually so it reads a little bit better visually. If I refresh, save this and refresh, see how it removes the margin from my H1. And I can actually do the same thing maybe with these paragraphs, maybe no margin. And if I only have one class, oops, that's actually an ID. So I would then use class equals no margin, and class equals no margin. So you can have an HTML element inherit multiple classes and an ID, but it should only have one ID to be semantically correct. So if I refresh here, actually, maybe I'll change the oh, here's the problem. No margins, plural. So that's something to always be careful. I make the same mistakes, and I'll assign something a reference name that's plural, and then I'll forget that it was plural and type it as singular, and then of course it's not going to work. So basically, this is the basics of CSS using IDs and classes. Now let's go back here, and for the I'm going to take basically this, and I'm going to apply the third method, which is instead of using using CSS by having the CSS in the head, I'm going to save the CSS to an external file, and I'm going to show you exactly how that's done. So I'm going to copy this and then delete, and then open new files, and I'm going to remove these tabs here. And if you're using Notepad++, basically you would do Control A to select, and then you hit the tab to indent, and then you press Shift tab to remove the tabs. And the tabs are just for presentational purposes, to make it easier to read. And I'm going to save this basically as lesson 07-external css.css. Notice when I saved as a .css file in Notepad++, it does the color coding. Of course, if you're on Mac or using a different software, the colors are gonna look a little bit differently. And now I'm going to remove this part, and then copy this to create the reference. Note that your .css file needs to be in the same directory or folder as your .html file. If you want it to be in a different folder, for example, if you want to create a dedicated CSS folder, I can type in CSS/ and then that will change the reference to for your web browser to read into the CSS folder and then your CSS file. But for this purpose, I'm just gonna have it all in the same folder. And at this point, if I refresh this, it's gonna be exactly the same. So that's basically the premise of having an external CSS file. The code's a lot easier to read because you don't, it's not saturated with all of these style sheets. So like I said, borders, backgrounds, margins, and padding are extremely useful. It's not as useful in these really basic rudimental examples, but as you have stuff that's more well designed, more complex, it becomes a lot more important. I'm actually going to save this as a different file name, so that way I can just upload all these in a zip file for you. External css.html. And then I'm gonna undo some of this stuff and okay, so these two are swapped, so what I'm going to do is just take this code, and you don't have to follow along. I basically got the file, save the files as the wrong file name, so I'm just making that change right now. Alright, so now I'm going to take the first example and save it as example 2. And what I'm going to do here is example 2. I'm going to throw in a custom background image here. And for the purpose of here, I'm just going to use my logo. Or actually, I'm going to just Google maybe background textures. I'm gonna save this this background maybe as lesson 07 dot bg. Alright, so the way I would do that is within the CSS, I would type in body, and just as a sidebar, this, and this is the exact same thing. It's just a matter of how you want to present your code. So as far as having the background, I can do background image. So make sure you wrap it around the URL and then parentheses and then the single quotes. You can also use double quotes. You actually don't even need quotes, but it's always a good idea to throw it in there, just in case, for example, you have something weird in the file name or the folder name. You don't want to break. If I refresh here, or actually here, let me go. This is basically how this looks like. So what I'm going to do now is I don't want to kind of repeat like this. So what I can also do is throw in a background repeat equals no repeat, and then refresh here, and basically that only it's one instance. If I want to, let's say, stretch all the way across, I believe it's background. Let me actually go to the CSS reference here, and I'm going to show you all the different ones. Background. I believe it's background size that I'm looking for. And there's cover. There you go. So background size equals cover. If I refresh it, this is basically what cover is, which is kind of cool. it just really depends on what your application is and what you're trying to accomplish. And it doesn't have to be in the body. I can actually, let's say if I want to find another picture, maybe for maybe I want a section on the top of the website. For example, maybe have inside the paragraph even. So if I want, let's say, a custom background in the paragraph, I'm gonna search for maybe, let's see, sunrise or texture, sunrise texture. This looks pretty cool. So I'm going to save this picture as lesson 07-BG2. And what I can do now is for the H1 class, I'm going to throw in an H1, and I'm going to put a background image URL images. If I go back and refresh, see how that's basically the sunrise. Forgot that. Height equals, maybe I want it to be 200 pixels so you can see a little better. Background size equals or background, yeah, size equals cover. Background repeat, no repeat. So this is basically what I have so far. Maybe this color is for the body background isn't what I want. Maybe I know there's a site Css or website background textures. Let me see if I can find that website here. Oh, here it goes. Subtle backgrounds. So I can then download one of these subtle backgrounds, maybe the wave, or so the website subtlepatterns.com. I'm going to include the link to this under the resources section, under the corresponding lesson notes. So I'm going to extract, and let's see, save this to here. I'm going to call it, oops, I think it's just unzipped. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna rename this to lesson 07 BG3. Note that this is a .png file format, it's not JPEG, so I got to make that update here. And if I go back and refresh, I don't want this to be a cover, and I do want it to repeat. So this is basically how it looks like. It looks kind of cool, pretty neat. I actually don't need to specify this because by default it does repeat. Now let's examine some of the other CSS properties that may be useful and cool here. See how this text is stuck right beneath here? If I want to add some margin to that, and maybe even throw a box around my paragraph text. So maybe I don't want the paragraph text to be bold. Maybe I want them to all have a border equals 1 pixel solid, maybe maroon, and background equals 1 pixel, or background maybe pink. So if I save that and refresh, this is kind of how the paragraph text looks like. If I want, let's say, to have some spacing around each other, I'm going to put margin top 20 pixels. If I refresh, nothing happens. Margin bottom 20 pixels. If I refresh, still nothing happens. Maybe something is overriding my code. Here you go. I've applied the no margins to it, so I'm just going to get rid of this class right here. Because it doesn't really serve me a whole lot of purpose over here. So now the margins are activated, but See how the text here, it's kind of stuck right next to the border around there. So I'm going to throw in some padding. So I can do a padding. So I can do padding top, left, bottom, and right. But if all 4 sides are going to be same, I can just do padding equals 20 pixels. If I refresh it, that's basically how it looks like. I'm going to change the H1 so that way and indent it so it's a little bit easier to read. Maybe I'm going to put font family equals Arial sans serif and color equals white. And in this case, I'm going to remove the important class and refresh it. And also I'm going to do maybe a padding top equals 50 pixels and padding left equals 50 pixels. So this is basically what I have the top portion of my website. So it's pretty cool. In the tutorials or in the lessons before this, our web pages were very basic as far as design-wise. Now we're getting into a lot more intricate details, and of course you can apply your creativity to it. Just going to do one more thing. Margin equals 0, and that basically will close up the left and right space for the H1 element. Now H1 has its built-in margin, and I don't want the top to have that space here, so I'm going to do a margin top equals 0. If you're doing if you're using 0 as the if that's the value of your unit, you don't have to specify the units, because 0 anything is just 0, so you don't have to specify pixels for that. So this is what I want as far as up here, but for these I want some spacing in to the left and right. So what I'm going to do with the paragraph is margin right equals maybe 40 pixels and margin left equals 40 pixels. If I refresh it, that basically achieves a little bit more of what I wanted. So at this point, I can also put in maybe H2 tag. Here are some paragraph examples. Refresh it. And now I can write one class for H2, and I can put maybe font family equals Arial sans serif and margin left equals 40 pixels. See how it's coming along? It's looking a little bit more like a website, or a website that you would typically see online, as opposed to some of the examples in the previous lessons. They're basically what you would expect to see in examples when you learn HTML. This is a little bit more closer to what you would expect to see as far as real life examples. And of course, within the paragraph, I can apply a font to as well. Arial sans serif. Refresh it. So this basically, gives you a lot of flexibility, and the only properties that we've really used are the background related ones: margin, padding, and color, and fonts, and we're able to do a lot with just these basic building blocks. Let's see what else we have. Also, if you want to do maybe apply certain emphasis to certain things, you can apply a thicker border to it. For example, maybe first for the important class, border bottom equals 4 pixels, 4 solid. Like that, for example. Notice that some of these properties can actually be consolidated using some of these CSS shorthands. I'm going to show you basically how. For example, all of the background ones, that includes background image, background size, background repeat. This, I'm going to move this basically to the bottom over here. And to comment stuff out in CSS, basically it's like this. I'm going to repeat this, and you want to start with a slash and then a star, and then you want to end it with a star and then slash. It doesn't really, the color coding just isn't there for here. Let me see if I can change the language here to CSS. Maybe that'll be a little bit easier. Okay, so I changed the color coding to CSS, so now you can kind of see that this piece of CSS is indeed commented out. So I'm going to rewrite this using some shorthands. So what I'm going to do is remove this, and I'm just going to type in background, and I can do URL, and then I'm just going to copy this URL just to make life a little bit easier on myself. And as far as the next piece of background related property that we need is the background size. So I'm just going to put cover, and I'm going to put no repeat. If I save this and I refresh the page, actually I believe you do need a separate one for cover. But as far as the no repeat one, you can stick it in there. Also, something else you can do is you can actually put in a background color, which I actually didn't show you earlier. So I can put, for example, background color equals yellow. If I refresh it, basically the background color works really well if you have an image where it leaves a certain gap of space, or if you have a transparent image, for example, maybe like a PNG extension image where you want to fill up that transparent space with a solid color. This is how you would do so. I can put all of that into just one CSS property, and that will basically achieve the same thing. Unfortunately for the background size, it does look like I need to have a separate tag for that. So basically that's how you would consolidate and use a CSS shorthand for the background property. The next one is padding as well as margins. And for that, I'm going to modify this important class to really illustrate that. Or actually, I'm going to modify the second one, the intro, to really illustrate that. So if I have maybe a margin, margin top equals 100 pixels, and see how the top and bottom margins are 100 and the left and right margins are 200 pixels. So the way we would consolidate this is like this. I'm going to comment this piece out, copy this, and I can rewrite this as margin and then 100 pixels and then 200 pixels. See how it's the exact same thing? This so let me walk you through what this means. If you just put margin and then two values, the first value denotes the top and bottom, and the second value denotes the left and right. Now, of course, if all four sides are the same, then you can just have one value. So this basically gives me 100 pixels of margin all around this, and if I do that, basically gives me 100 pixels of margin on top and bottom, and 200 to the left and the right. So these two are the exact same thing. Now I'm going to then modify the maybe I'm going to let me delete this comment here. I'm going to create another paragraph, and I'm just going to call this intro 2, so that way I can leave that one alone for you as an example. So if I do intro 2, I can do margin top equals you know what, let me do padding instead, so that way visually it's a little bit easier to see. So by default, if I refresh it, basically this is intro 2. If I do padding top equals 50 pixels, padding left equals I'm gonna do padding right actually first. Padding right equals 200 pixels. Padding bottom equals 100 pixels, and padding left 0. If I refresh here, this is how it looks like. It looks kind of strange, but for the purpose of showing you this, it does make sense to have all 4 of these as different units. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this one more time and then comment out the original version, so that way you can reference to it. So this is what I'm going to type. If I refresh it, it should still be the same. Now, what exactly did I just do here? Keep in mind that margin and padding, it's the shorthands are the same. So so just keep that in mind. The first, if you have 4 values, the first one denotes top, second one denotes the right side. So the right side is 200 pixels of margin. Of course, it's a little bit hard to see that since it's a short piece of text. The third one is the bottom. This is 100 pixels, and the last one is left, 0 pixels. And the reason why it's top, right, bottom, left is, think of a clock. It's moving clockwise. So you start from noon, then 3 p.m., 6, 9, and and that's basically, it just rotates across in a clockwise fashion, and that's how padding and margin works as far as the shorthands for it. So you can write it this way or that way if that way is easier for you. Let's see. So for the border, it looks like I already kind of used the shortcut unwittingly, or just without even realizing it here. I'm gonna copy this. This is the full notation. And I'm going to refresh here. See how it creates a 2-pixel solid green border. I can change solid to, for example, dotted, and it's dotted, but for this purpose I'm going to just change it back. And so the shorthand for writing this for the border is I can just type in border top 2-pixel solid green. This is basically the same thing. As far as with the border shorthand notation, it's the same if I want it to be border dash left or border dash right. It's going to be the same, or if I want to be the same all around, just border will serve that purpose basically. I'm going to change this back to border top so you have the identical match example here. Oops. So that in a nutshell is CSS and all of the powerful and really cool stuff that you can do with it. I'm going to include a link to not only the W3 School full list of CSS attributes, but I'm also going to include a link to subtle patterns.com because they have a lot of really cool stuff that you can just easily grab and download and use as background images for your website, and they're all really elegant. I'm a huge fan of the site. The other link that I have is the W3 School full list of CSS attributes. I'm sorry, they're actually not attributes, they're properties. I need to go and change that. But basically for your background, here's all the different things you can do with background, all of the different things you can do with border. And there's, this is basically the full list. I mean, I can keep naming, but basically, if you just go here and you click into any of these, you can click on the try it yourself, and then you can just edit stuff here, and it's going to change on the fly on the right hand side. So it's a really powerful and cool tool, and I've included the link to this on the bottom of this lesson, and I'm also going to include all of the examples in a zip file for you, so you can just download that and start playing around with it and really fully understand CSS and use it to apply to your HTML document to enhance it and make it custom to exactly how you want it to be. Thank you for completing this lesson as part of my HTML 101 course. You can get access to all of the other lessons and course notes and code samples and downloadables and resources. All that's available for free at yan4n1.com/HTML101. And if you have any questions or concerns pertaining to this specific lesson, feel free to post a comment beneath this YouTube video, and I'll try my best to go in and answer all of your questions and concerns. Also, this video is self-funded, but here's how you can help. You will need a domain name and web hosting for your website to be available for the world to see, and I highly recommend HostGator. It's only a couple bucks a month, and you can upload all of your HTML files there. The customer support is phenomenal. Also, if you want to have a blog, there's a one-click button that you can just click, and it'll deploy a WordPress blog for you, and you can have everything professionally set up. If you sign up with HostGator through my affiliate link at yan4n1.com, not only will you have get a little bit of savings, but it's gonna help me because I get a small commission from the affiliate link if you do sign up, and that's going to help me in supporting my YouTube channel, as well as supporting me in creating more courses available for free for you guys.